Hey everyone, on today's episode, I sit down with Erica Shubin. She has a great story to tell. Now, and one that we all need to hear, especially during these times. So, she is a mom of 5. She has 3 biological kids and 2 kids that were adopted from Ethiopia. She tells us a little bit about what it was like adopting children from another country and how representation matters, not only just so that her kids see other Black people, but that they actually are immersed in Ethiopian culture and that they have Ethiopian ties in the United States. And even that she decided representation mattered within her family, and that's what led her to adopt her second child from Ethiopia. But she also tells this story where racism was made super real for her when her kids were accused of robbery in progress, and they were 11 and 9. And she tells a story about the police officer coming to the house and what that was like for her, and how that kind of shaped her perspective of how prevalent racism is, and how important it is that we talk about these issues so that we can start becoming aware of our implicit bias and changing that. So she does a great job telling this story, and I hope that you guys can glean some insight from it. I'll let her do the talking because she does a great job. Hi, I'm Rebecca Britt, and this is the Stable Moments Podcast, the show where we discuss all things related to the foster care system and early childhood trauma, from foster parents, trauma experts, former foster kids, and beyond. We'll take a deep dive into the complexities of the foster care crisis in an effort to better understand how to fix it. Well, thank you so much, Erica, for being on the podcast today. I know that you've got an amazing story and a good perspective to give to our audience, especially during the times right now. So I thought it was really important to have you on, and I'm so grateful that you have joined us. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to the world of adoption.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's this is my first podcast, a little bit different, but I'm excited to be here. Let's see. I am a mom to 5 amazing kids, married to my high school sweetheart, and we currently live in Colorado, but have lived in Oregon, Arizona, and Florida before this. The world of adoption, let's see. I was a nanny for a family that adopted 3 of their 4 children, and I would take care of the other kids while they were off in other lands picking up their kids. And so I get to see firsthand what that looked like and how they integrated children into their family. And we had a couple other friends that had adopted, and I tried to convince my parents to adopt, and that just didn't happen. So I was pretty convinced that I wanted to adopt from a pretty young age. When my husband and I got married very young, we started our family also very young. And it wasn't until I was almost 30 that it really actually came to fruition, and my husband was on board. And in 2008, we adopted our 3-year-old son, Silas, which kind of just, we dove headfirst into the culture of Ethiopia and the Ethiopian community, the Black community. And at the time we lived in Arizona. So that just kind of, it just happened. It was natural. It wasn't something that we really had to feel like we needed to work super hard at. We loved that community, and there was a pretty big Ethiopian community, and it just kind of flowed over into the Black community, just culturally. Just Ethiopians are very welcoming, and so it just worked for us. And then in 2011, we adopted our daughter because honestly, we could give Silas a whole lot, and we could give him, the world, so to speak, but we could never be Black. And so that was a really big piece for us. And that's a really tough thing. I think sometimes it was really hard for me to talk about because I didn't know how that would be perceived, or if that was an appropriate thing or an appropriate reason to want to adopt again. But we were honest with our social worker, and she said, if that's the only reason, she said, I'll approve you today. so it became and has become a much bigger piece than we could have ever imagined. Their relationship is unprecedented, and it's something that honestly makes me cry, because if we didn't adopt Zara, what that would look like for Silas. So it's been really neat for our family to figure out that, you know, the racial integration piece and how that works for us, and being honest about that is important, I think. So
Yeah.
that's a really long answer for a very short question.
Well, it was a big loaded question. No, well, that's great. So you tell me a little bit more about how you came to realize that not being Black mattered to your son, and that representation mattered within your family, because we hear all the time representation matters. And we heard from I don't know if you follow Raising Cultures, but she is a woman she has a big Facebook following. She's a Black woman that adopted a white baby. She's also adopted other children of different races, but she's gotten a lot of, like, why would you adopt a white baby, and you should help your own, and a lot of white people calling saying you've stolen this baby, and like the cops coming.
Oh, wow.
And like, she's a therapist, her husband's a police officer, and they're an awesome family, and they have a very cool page where they go live like every day and show their family happenings. But she was telling
What is it called again? You'll have
Raise-
to link me to that, because I want to watch that.
yeah, it's Raising Culture. She is so just real, and like, you feel comfortable asking any questions, which I think is really important right now and anytime.
Huge. Yeah.
And she talked about how representation mattered, and if you're white and you have a Black kid, or just making sure that they see somebody that looks like them. Like, she said that she went to an all Black church before she had this white baby, and they switched church so that they would have some white representation while he was growing up. But I hadn't thought about representation within your family. So can you tell me a little bit more about like how you came to understanding representation mattered even within your family for your son?
I think having him, we were pretty immersed in the Ethiopian culture in Arizona, because there was a lot of adoptive families that had Ethiopian children, and then the Ethiopian community there really opened their doors to our whole adoption group. It was quite phenomenal. They would host dinners for us. They would do celebrations. It was so neat to just be a part of that. And so when we would watch him and how he would act there with, other kids that looked like him, with adults that looked like him, it was so obvious, the connection. And the Ethiopian culture is very loving and welcoming as it is. And so he just kind of had that tendency anyways. And if you meet him, he's extremely gregarious, very outgoing, very sees the best in absolutely everything. And so just watching him, it was just obvious that he was a different person, and just so comfortable. And I mean, he's pretty, I guess he accommodates to any situation, but he thrived there. And so it just was one thing that kind of we just talked about, and we thought we were done with 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls, seems perfect. My son had prayed for a brother, which is initially kind of what led us to adopt to begin with. I had really tough pregnancies, so biological wasn't an option. And he just never gave up. He wanted a brother, and I had always wanted to adopt, so that just kind of made sense. So a 5th child wasn't really, it wasn't in the plan, so to speak. But I think just the overwhelming, obvious need for Silas to have someone that looked like him. And then I just felt a heaviness that when we were actually in country, we went to his orphanage, and there was a little girl, and she just clung to me. And my husband knelt down and he said, "We're not done yet, are we?" And I said, "No." So it kind of started when it got there, but it was just more confirming, the longer that Silas was home, just the need to, um, just to have somebody that looked like him. And Zara is the perfect caboose to our family, and she is fiery and sweet and kind and loving, and her and Silas just are, they're super super tight.
So, what do you feel like the difference is? Like, were your biological kids, was that transition pretty easy for them to accept new kids into the house, to accept them as their siblings? And for you, what role has race played in that? Like, as far as family conversations or different things that you would do differently if you feel like you had adopted white kids out of state's custody, um, like what role has race played in adopting?
We knew going in that we were making some choices that may not be looked upon as positive. But in fact, we didn't tell our family that we were adopting until we were approved and our home study was halfway done. Mostly because my husband is full-blooded Russian, and in the Russian culture, Russians marry Russians. And so his parents left that really strict church part of it. So obviously I'm not Russian, so they all married out. But crossing racial and cultural bounds was going to be another thing. So while our immediate family is completely supportive and loving and all of that, and in fact everybody is on the outside, I know that it's definitely it's not an easy topic to discuss even now. Like it's a tough one. And obviously for us it's been a journey to get to the place where we are. I was raised that, love sees no color, but my dad had some innuendos that he used that would not align with that belief system. So it wasn't until, honestly, we adopted that I realized there was more than it was actually our adoption training classes that we went through, started that conversation really. That it's not really a love sees no color thing. And so I think for us, we raised our kids that, Jesus loves me, this I know, and also he loves all the little children of the world. And so for our kids and for us, it wasn't an issue at all. Now, were we nervous about teaching our kids the difference between black and white and all other races? Yeah, of course. And we've raised the kids, all of them, equally with regard to how they're seen in our family and how we see them and how God sees them and how the world sees them from our perspective. But we've also had to be really honest about how the world sees them. And I think we have gone with we are raising strong black men and women. We're raising strong white men and women. And also just we're raising strong women and strong men, period. So while we have to talk about things with our black children that we don't have to talk to our white children about, we do it in an all-inclusive way. Like, hey, we have to have these conversations with Silas that I don't have to have with Skylar, because I don't worry about Skylar in the same ways that I worry about Silas. And also just having an open and honest conversation with all of the kids in general. And so my bio kids are extremely protective, like really protective. But likewise, my son from Ethiopia is very protective of all of his sisters, even though he's the youngest boy. So there's there's certain things that race, skin color doesn't matter. Like the boys protect the girls, they just do. And I would almost say Sas might be even a little bit more protective than Skylar, just different personalities or whatever, but it doesn't have anything to do with, skin color.
Sure.
So I think there's things that we discuss openly that are just personality things, and then there's things that, because we are raising you to be you're going to be a Black man. When you leave my house, you are no longer under the protection of our white privilege, to be honest.
Right.
Like that has been a rough path to get to, like, as a family, just, because it's so politicized, and you have to separate the politics with the facts. And so when I think, because of our story and when that actually happened, it was so eye-opening for us, because I saw it in a way that I never had and experienced it.
One of again, the woman from Raising Cultures, well, not only did she talk about this, but we had a white family on that has adopted Black kids, and then we've had Raising Cultures on, who's a Black family that raised has a white son, and both families said that they had to prepare their extended family for, like, we are about to adopt somebody of a different race, and like the racist stuff isn't going, for the white family, they said they had to, tell grandma, like, the racism or racist stuff has got to stop, like, or it won't be allowed in our home or whatever. And, Kia from Raising Culture said that she had to tell her mom, like, you're going to love this white baby just like I love this white baby. And so both, regardless of which race they were, the families had to talk to their external families and say, like,
yeah,
this is what's going to happen. And it kind of changed things a little bit in their dynamics as a whole, which was a great thing. And the other thing that you just brought up that reminded me of that Raising Cultures interview was Kia had said, like, yeah, it's great Black kids being raised by white families, but at some point they're Black in America. So, like, if you haven't gotten them the representation, and you haven't had those conversations, and they haven't had a moment to understand all the dynamics that means, then when they're, alone in New York at college and they realize what it means to be Black in America, it can be traumatizing.
Yes.
So it's really your job to prepare them as much as possible for that. And, hopefully we raise awareness within a community where that can lessen and lessen, which is what we're trying to do now. But so you just alluded to it, which is the story that which is the reason why I reached out to you. So it's the story that you shared on social media, the great post about you experiencing the racism that your son and daughter experienced. So can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, we lived in Florida at the time, and I say affluent, but it's a white community with a decent amount of diversity, but still, a pretty, where there's money, there's just, opinions or whatever. So I had a thing about not wanting my kids to go door to door. I don't really like it for any of my kids, but I always let my kids do it, like whether they were selling candy bars for school or, whatever, cookie dough or, all the things that they do. But for my youngest two kids, I always made one of their older white siblings go with them. And not because I didn't trust them or think that they were responsible or anything like that. There's a piece that for a while they were just little, but the other piece, even as they got older, when I would have let my other two go, I was concerned about their skin color and how, what could happen. And so I was very cautious about that. My husband probably thought I was a little bit too cautious, but so the first time I let them go out, and we've lived in the neighborhood for 7 years at that point, so people knew our family. And they went knocking on doors because my son, little boys go through the desire to earn money and to work hard, and he wasn't getting enough work at home, and so he really wanted to go out into the neighborhood, and that's just how he's wired too. And so a neighbor had encouraged him, and he just could not let go of it. And so I finally relented, and I said, that's fine, but you both have to go together and you have to stay together. And, you knock on doors, and if they're not home, then you leave. And, just gave him some basic, for me, I was preparing them for the world, but also because of their skin color. I was concerned.
And how
And
old were
so
they?
they were 9 and 11.
Okay.
And, it was, it's a beachy town, what it's like. It's small, and it just, our neighborhood it's safe, is how I thought at the time. And so, I sent them out. They were gone for, maybe 30 minutes, and they came back, and I was happy. And, everyone was excited, and they didn't have any success, but they were talked to a few neighbors, and it was a good experience for them. And so when the officer showed up at the door, I it was like one of those, of course he is. Of course. Of course I went against my gut. I let him go out. And so, the first impression of coming around the corner and seeing his hand on his gun, and then as soon as he looked up and saw me, that he takes it off, I'm like, I immediately I was on edge. And so, my kids are super respectful. And so my son had answered the door, and, he asked me if I lived there. Well, yes. And he said, well, have you seen anything suspicious in the neighborhood? No. It's July, it was hot. And he said, well, does he live here? And he points to my son. And I said, well, yeah, it's my son. And he said, oh, he said, and you could tell he was fumbling for words. And I think he suspected that it was kind of a bogus call at that point, anyways. Um, but he just, went on to question me, and I questioned him as to what the deal was. Why? How did you end up at my door? And that's part that I didn't share in the story, just because it didn't fit in. But they had told him. They told him where I lived, so they knew.
Mm.
And the accusation was that there was a robbery in progress, and he didn't tell me that at the time. I found it out later. And that there was teenage kids. My kids are small. They're not big. And they were really
9
little
and
then.
11 is hardly
Yeah, but
teenage.
and they're small anyways. So they're small for their age. And I mean, even now at 15, my son is 5'5". So they were little. So he it just was, it turned into a decent conversation, but basically the accusations were that they were breaking into cars, and that was the concern. And some older ladies at the church had made the call because they'd seen them, told the officers that they were rattling doors and trying to get into cars, which my kids said they never touched cars. They opened a screen door because there was no doorbell, and they just did it to knock on the door. Um, and then but basically there was two older ladies that made a false report because they were black. And I mean, that's the bottom line of it. The process of getting to that point, you know, me having to go find out on the police report what was actually reported, because the officer really didn't want to tell me, and it was obvious. Um, and so he just, asked several questions, took my kids' names and ages, and in hindsight, I never would have given him that information. I did have it redacted. So, it's just, the whole thing was disconcerting because his demeanor changed when he saw me. So, what if I had been black? He didn't want to admit that it was a race issue, but when I pushed it, yes. Um, so it was just it wasn't a good feeling. And it took a long time to process that and to deal with the wounded hearts of my kids, because they heard it. And I tried really hard not to make it sound like race in front of them. But as soon as the door closed, they burst into tears and they said that was because of the color of our skin.
Mm.
And so they knew it wasn't you can't hide it. So up until that point, I feel like I had really protected them, so to speak, right, wrong, or otherwise, but it was a gaping wound at that point that we had to address.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I think that it's interesting because I feel like it's easy for white people to jump onto the black and white, you know, um, police brutality bandwagon. That's the
Yeah,
only problem here,
right.
um, and it takes accountability off us. We can just say if we would just get the police right, then racism doesn't exist, I guess. Um,
No.
so there, there's more to that, and having a whole system, obviously, in everything we see, right, in judicial
Right.
system and healthcare and everything, we see a racist system, but also if the community at large is going to be sending these calls in and they're going to sound like a robbery in progress, and a police officer is trained to show up to a robbery in process with expecting somebody to be armed or
Right.
combative or whatever, then their training might say to be super aggressive when that's not what it is. It's not a robbery in progress. It's a kid asking if he can mow his lawn. So,
Well, they did a surround of our whole neighborhood, and that's I guess normal. Which makes sense because if there was a robbery in progress, they're going to want to protect the neighborhood, which makes sense. But that's not what was happening.
yeah. So, how do we build awareness around this more, the community's responsibility on these calls? I don't know if I'm sure you've heard about Governor Cuomo saying that making a racist 911 call he wants that to be illegal or offense you can get charged with.
Well, it's interesting because somebody had commented something to that effect on our story about, or they had reposted it, and I can't check all the reposts at this point, but I was looking at first, and somebody said, um, "White older ladies, I'm talking to you. Um,
Mm.
you could. This is how kids are murdered," and it was so pointed, but it really made me think that, it's true. Don't make assumptions based on the color of someone's skin. And that goes for anything, So if you're making an assumption, it was broad daylight. They were sitting in a church parking lot. We live 2 doors down from a church parking lot. If you know where we live, why wouldn't you go talk to my kids
Mm.
versus just making a phone call? Hey, did you need something? Something so simple. And so when you humanize humans, it makes a difference. And I don't know how to fix that other than something. The concern is by making a law of, oh, you can't make a racist phone call. What if somebody really wasn't being racist and they make the phone call and then it turns out to be nothing, but it could have been something? And I think that's the hard part, is figuring out how to do that well. So I tend to be a little bit more on the human side of how do we bridge the gap? And I do think that it's an everybody thing. We
Yeah.
all have to be willing to listen to each other. Um, and I mean, there's a comment actually on my story that I'm going to address after this, and it's the first person of color that has said something that they took the story negatively. And that's the first. Everyone else has been white that has said that. And it's because they felt like I should share it immediately. And because I didn't, then I was basically holding out and not sticking up for people of color. So I want to hear that. Um, but it's those kinds of things that make traumatized people not say anything,
Mm-hmm.
because they don't know if they'll do it right, and they don't know if they'll do it justice. And honestly, if I had written that post when it happened, it wouldn't have been what it was now,
Mm-hmm.
because I was angry and I had to work through and figure out my own privilege. And I had to, for me, my kids were my first priority, not social media. And so healing hearts and working through um, that, and then working through my own parts and getting justice for my kids. So yeah, it wasn't a priority. I do believe there's a verse in the Bible that says, for such a time as this, and I do believe that. I don't think anything's wasted. But yeah, I did have to find my voice. And I think that that's the part of listening, you know, from the white people side to the people of color side, is that we both have to listen to each other. And I think that that's something that, like, be the bridge. I don't think white people have listened to black people for a very long time. So I think that we get to shut up and listen.
Mm-hmm.
And, but in order to build a community of people that see each other, I do think there's a time and a place that we have to listen to each other.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
I am totally willing to listen first.
Yes, absolutely. And have you read Glennon Doyle's new book Untamed? I don't know if you've heard of it.
No, I haven't.
Um, it's a big buzz book right now, but there is a chapter in it. It's good. You should read it. It would be worth your time. But
I've read her other stuff, so
yeah, well, this is her being like, what was I thinking, writing those other books? But because she's her most authentic self now, I guess, is kind of the point of being Untamed. But she does have a chapter in there called Racists, and like it's pretty good. And it just talks about how she like came out to do this work, and she was gonna like talk about this with her white audience, and like she got called racist for thinking that she could teach this, that she should really be passing people on to Black people that are already training on this and already talking on this and actually getting their perspective. But she also acknowledges that just stepping out into this work, you're going to be called racist. You're going to be called out for your privilege. Like, you're going to take some hits. And she said it's really easy to just recoil into like our privilege is actually that we never have to say anything. We can just recoil and pretend that things don't exist. So she said that's like the struggle of the work, is like continuing to show up regardless of how many times you kind of get shut down. Yeah. And so I thought that was good. And yeah, something else that you brought up, I agree with you that the first thing I thought of with the Governor Cuomo thing was like, cool. I wonder what Erica thinks about that, because you don't want people scared to call in a crime. And being completely honest, like my husband was a police officer in Atlanta for years, and Black Lives Matter, the first time Black Lives Matter really came on the scene, he was in Atlanta. And like the pressure was so strong that it was almost like we don't pull over Black people. It was like we don't enforce crime, we don't enforce law or whatever, because we're nervous about this interaction and how it will be, construed or whatever. So then you start doing a blind eye to crime that's being done by certain people. So it's like, that's not the direction we want to go in. We do need to be able to, and I mean, even when you were talking about sending your son out and being like, well, because of the color of your skin, you weren't saying this out loud, but in your head, you're thinking, because of the color of your skin, I might not want to send you out. And then me, I'd be like, oh my gosh, is that racist? Like, you can't have the same experience that my kid can have because I'm overprotecting you because of the color of your skin. So I don't know.
It's a constant battle of I mean, I think as a parent, anyways, you have a constant battle of, oh, am I going to screw the kid up? Oh, am I going to do this right or wrong? And I think it's just extra stuff that you think about, especially as a white mom. I don't know. I mean, I think that's the part. Like, I feel like, oh, now I see what Black moms feel like, because it is, that's just the way that it is for them. Like, you don't have the comparison of, oh, well, my white son, I didn't have to do that. Well, no, they just have Black sons. And so I think that's been eye-opening for me too, is that this is just their normal. And so for me, it's that part has been heavy hitting, I think, because that's the part that, we don't necessarily see or think about. And that's the part where it's like, wow, that's unfair. That shouldn't have to happen. They shouldn't have to worry about. I shouldn't have to think about the different skin colors of my kids as to whether or not they can do something. I shouldn't have to be worried and stalling on wanting my 15-year-old to get his permit because I know that's an extra thing and I'm going to worry every time. I mean, I worry every time my kids leave the house, but I'm going to worry about things that I don't worry about with, my other kids. And I wish that that wasn't reality, but I also don't think that, okay, this is going to get a little political, but defunding the police is the answer. I don't think, and we went to a protest and all of the speakers, they just kept reiterating, even though there's always that group of people that are going to be there with their defund signs, but they were like, we do not support defunding the police. And, they're like, we are Black Americans, but we are not in support of that. That is not the answer. And so I'm like, if they don't think it's the answer, I don't think it's the answer. But
well, and if anything, if we want better training, if we want more time spent, then we actually would have to add more funding. It's interesting. I would love to talk to Kia Jones Baldwin, who has
when you said that, I thought,
because her husband's a police officer. So I'm like, I wonder, because she was like, Blue Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter and White Lives Matter, and this, like that's I know that she must have a perspective on that, but
oh, I'm sure.
But yeah, I agree, and it's not all, well, it's I keep saying black and white, but I'm meaning it's not that clear. There's just so much gray area, and there's just we're not dealing with like one one system, and that's why
Right.
I loved your story, because it's easy to focus on police brutality. Like, yes, okay, like we need to make sure that there's equality for all and that people are fair, treated justly. But it doesn't come down to police. Like, we're totally missing the mark for me. Absolutely, like they're part of it, but how are we treating these people once they're going to court? How are we treating these people once they're in jail? How are we treating these people when they go to the ER? How are we treating these people when they're walking in our neighborhoods and we're in a church parking lot? So,
right.
Like, I think if we can bring it back to personal accountability, meaning what is our role? What can we do? I think that's, looking in the mirror, is difficult, but we all do have something that we can do. So I wonder, say there's somebody listening to this podcast that may be adopting a Black son or daughter, and they want to listen, they want to be able to, like, I can just imagine that having a community of Black parents, of saying like when I was in that, if I was in that situation that you were in, of like, should I let him out? Should I do this? Should I do, like, I would want to talk to some Black parents and say, like, what do y'all do? And like, what do you think that I should do? So are you able to find those resources? And do you think that that's something that white families could find? Because I feel like it would be really sad if there was just no way to kind of get that community around you, and then you were really just like a white family with a Black child, and then all you had was a white community around you.
Right. I think it's super important. That has been more difficult for us here. We are actually in the process of just building some authentic community, specifically with people of color, and that has been a neat thing to see happen. I have a good friend that we met through Starbucks. I worked there super part-time, and she was actually my old manager, and she is married to a biracial man, and he has wrestled with, he doesn't belong in the Black community, he doesn't belong in the white community. So we've had some pretty open conversations about that. And he would love to mentor. And so it's just kind of happened in a neat way that him and Silas are very similar. And so I'm so thankful for that relationship, and it's building and growing. But it's very important that you seek it out. And it's not weird, and the Black community is going to respect it. I've never had anybody think negatively. Like, we purposely, we don't take our daughter to a white salon. We take her to a Black salon. We don't take our son to, he has dreads now and he does them himself, but we have never taken him to a white salon ever. So little things that you can think about on how you can have that influence in their lives. And it might be small, like take them to, you know, we take our kids to Ethiopian restaurants so that they have that for their, you know, even though I can cook some Ethiopian food, it's very important that we do that. There's an Ethiopian community here that we've connected with. So just having them integrate in ways, find a Black mom that will give you advice. I had the privilege of going to adoption retreats every year for 7 or 8 years. And there was a Black mom there, and she would regularly, she was a speaker, and she's so open. She talked about hair care. She talked about, you know, teaching your sons and what's appropriate and what's not, and all of those real things that she thinks about. But she's also just very nuts and bolts. She's super honest, raw and real. And, you know, she's like, yeah, no, my son is not going to wear his pants hanging down low. He's not. And so, you know, just having somebody that's willing to talk about those things is really, really important. And you can just bounce things off of them. And, you know, even just teenage talk, you know, among Black kids, and then you have the white kids that think they can talk like that too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, her point was, no, it's not okay ever. It's just not. Don't do it. And so I learned a lot from her.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's imperative that you find it. And if you can't find it in your community, there are Facebook groups all over the place that have that, that will, you know, help you with your daughter's hair, or they will talk about Black culture or talk about what's appropriate and what's not. So if you don't have it, find it. That's the best advice I can give. Just, you've got to make it a priority.
Are there particular ways that you have been able or tried to bring awareness to your white friends and family?
Yeah, most of them didn't know about that story.
Wow.
So that was a pretty big shock. Our friends did. We had a group of, you know, like our inner circle, and then adoptive parents that did know prior. But no, our family didn't know. And a lot of it was because I knew that it would be a difficult conversation. And it's ongoing. I mean, that's something, it has spurred conversation for sure. And I think it was a little bit of a harsh wake up call to, you know, because they know our kids. And so if it could happen to them, it could happen to anybody.
Yeah, it's interesting when we have a personal connection.
Yeah, it changes things.
It does. And it's like, well, that is all of these people are just, you know, your neighbors or the people that you go to church with, or I mean, the personal connection really isn't that far. And it's funny when things happen close to home, we go like, well, this isn't right. And it's like, right, it hasn't been right. Like now you get it because you can put a face and a name and you know the character and you've grown up with somebody or whatever. So I think that is probably huge in not only the ripples that you've been able to make, you know, just through Facebook, but yeah, within your friends and family. So I ask everyone that comes on the podcast how we end the foster care crisis. Now, now you are you're an adoptive mom, that you didn't go through foster care. So I think to be more,
I have a pretty,
you're like, I
might
have
shock you.
written this out, Rebecca.
Hey, you asked me the question. You asked me an email. You told me.
Okay,
I'm ready. I'm so ready. I'm so ready to answer it.
I want to know, because it's the reason why we started the podcast. Was I wanted to listen before I told everybody what I thought. So yeah, let me know.
So I would totally, we have long said that eventually some point we will probably foster. Probably sooner than later. We have a lot of friends that are foster parents. I am actually a CASA for the state of Colorado. So I do have a tiny bit, while we haven't personally fostered, we have close friends that actively do. So I think personally, the church is a good start. I think that the church has a big call to action, and it's at our church in Florida. I was actually the head of our adoption foster care ministry, and I think that that is a big part. Getting the church in action, putting their money and their action where their mouth is, and doing what they say. And if you're pro-life, you better be pro foster care.
Right, pro-life after birth is
If
what
you're
I'm
pro-life, period. If you're
right.
pro-life, you better be actively seeking ways that you can get involved. And I'm not just saying take kids into your home. I could go that far if I got on, a little tangent, but that's a hot topic, so I think that if you're not fostering, then you can support families that are. You can support organizations that help to license foster families. You can donate to help set up homes. There's so many ways that you can get involved. And being a voice. I'm a CASA because we aren't fostering right now, but I get to be a voice for the kids, and that's my only job. My only job is to advocate for kids. There are not enough CASAs. I think every kid should have a CASA. I think that it's an important piece. Those kids don't have much of a voice. And so having somebody that's not the foster parent that may have ulterior motives, or the caseworker who just is overwhelmed and overburdened, to have a person that sticks up for them. So I think that's a piece. Get involved somewhere. Stop making excuses and get involved. There's something that you can do, even if it means not having kids in your home. But I do think that if you are able, then being a voice, being a bridge. Again, I think that, are you on the Be the Bridge group on Facebook?
Mm-mm.
It's they actually have you have 3 months of silence. You can't post or anything on the group, which I think is great. Yeah, it's just about listening. But I think that an openness and an honesty to work to keep kids in families, I think that's one piece. I think that there's another, and I just think that, yeah, I don't know. I think foster care there's such a huge need, and I think that if there's families that are willing to walk with families to get their kids back, I think is a huge piece, because a lot of times it's out of a socioeconomic status, it's out of poverty and just a lack of knowledge. And I think that it's important to go into being a foster parent as wanting to unify families versus adopt, so to speak. I mean, there's always, you know what I'm saying? There's always, you can adopt from foster care, but there's always a piece where parents, if they want their kids back, you need to be willing to walk the hard with them.
Right. Yeah. There's the intended purpose of the system is to rebuild families. And of course, the kids that have had parents' rights terminated, they certainly need to be adopted. But
yes.
Yeah, I love your answer. And I love you saying, starting with churches. We had Jason Palmer and his wife, who are foster parents, adoptive parents. And he said what triggered him to adopt or to start fostering was he was in the car and heard some statistic that was like, if every church had just one family fostering, that there'd be no foster care crisis.
Yep.
And he was like, that's insane. And he got like all angry at like these church members. And then he's like, what am I doing? Yeah, so then he did.
Yep.
He turned around and started fostering, and he's adopted kids, and he has a podcast as well called Foster Care: An Unparalleled Journey. So that's interesting. And my goal in the near future is, so Stable Moments is a mentorship program. It matches up a community mentor with a kid, and right now a horse, to do equine assisted learning, to develop life skills. And they meet for 1 hour a week for 10 months, so the whole school year. And then
That's so cool.
they can do it again and again and again for however many years they need to. And a lot of times we will have, like, we want male mentors to be with boys that don't have father figures. We want, different races to be with kids. If the kids in a community where they don't have, they don't see, Black men often, and there's a Black kid in our program, we'll match them up so that they can have a mentor. But what I've been working on is, what we found is, I thought the horses was like the magic, and we found that horses isn't the magic. Horses are really cool, and horse people love horses. And they're really intuitive, and they're different than a dog, and all these things that I could, tell everybody about. But the magic is actually mentorship. It's the kids showing up and seeing a person over and over again that wants to hang out with them, that's interested in them, that pours into them, that builds them up and builds their identity. So I've already done the hard work, because creating a program with horses is way harder than creating one without. So I can take the same structured model with the plans of care and the color-coded activities and all of that, but launch it to churches. And churches could have mentorship programs, because really, like, if you can't, all right, if a church stands up and says, we have this many kids that are in foster care and we need you to foster a kid, or we need you to support and make lasagna for a family. Okay, so there's lasagna or take a kid into my, like, it's a huge gap, right? But if you say,
right,
can you mentor a kid for 1 hour a week? So this family over here is going to actually foster a kid. Are the other families in this church willing to show up 1 hour a week so that they can get a break and they can be integrated into into the community? I feel like more people would foster if they felt like their church was running a mentorship program where a bunch of kids come from the community and they get matched up with a mentor, and the whole church is understanding about trauma and what these kids go through and how these families need support. My thought is that it would bring the issue more to the community, and also these mentors would start seeing, like, maybe we could foster, because that's what happened in my original program. I have mentors that used to be mentors that are now foster parents and adoptive parents, because they're like, oh, like, it didn't make it so scary for me because I was able to have time with a kid before I, signed on the dotted line or something. So
right. I think that's awesome. I would totally be supportive of helping whatever you need for that. That's super, super cool.
Well, I absolutely love that answer, and it's ignited again some of my passion to move even farther to help more and more kids. So this has been really enlightening. I hope that, I think that it all comes down to, we need to listen, and feel okay asking some questions. And
Yes.
if you're not getting answers, keep asking. And if you feel silly or wrong, preface your question with, this might not be the right way to put this. And please, I'm looking to get enlightened. Like, please, so that people don't feel.
And be willing to be wrong. I think that's a big part too. Be willing to say, I'm sorry. Be willing to say, I'm still learning. Be willing to be wrong. It's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thank people when they open your perspective, for sure. We all are always learning. So, all right, well, this was really helpful. Thank you so much. I think our listeners will love this. I know that we already have a bunch of foster adoptive parents that do have, interracial families, and I know that they also, there's plenty of people that are looking to foster, looking to adopt, and who knows, they might get a call at 3 a.m. and now they have a child of another race sitting in their home. And so these are the types of things that will help prepare them.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, have
Bye-bye.
a good day. Bye.